back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep informed of what's going on at www.justenergyradio.com and check out our wonderful archives that are all free. Anyway, we're here talking to Stephen Mehler about his book, The Land of Osiris. His webpage is GizaPyramid.com. That's GizaPyramid.com. Stephen, before the break, we were going to talk about the pyramids, but there's the belief that the pyramids were tombs. And there are a lot of pyramids, kind of scattered all around Egypt. Were any of them used for tombs? I mean, are they making kind of a good faith kind of assumption?
No. None of them were ever tombs.
Okay.
So let's explain why. Now, we said before one of the bases of chematology, the system Hakim taught us, was number 5. The 5 stages of the sum form the basis of the understanding that we're talking about cycles. And again, there's no beginning or no end in this tradition. So there's no Big Bang. That we don't support a Big Bang theory. There never was an actual beginning. It's only never-ending cycles. That's the key to this teaching. So it talks about 5 again as 5 purs. Now, again, the ancient language didn't have signs, what the Greeks called hieroglyphics, sacred signs, did not have signs for vowels. Vowels were inferred. They were sacred. They were never to be written down. That same tradition exists in Judaism today, where Judaism, when Hebrew is written in its pure form, it's written without vowels. You have to know how to pronounce the word. You have to know where the vowels go. Later, they were what called in vowel points were put into Hebrew, so the modern Hebrew we speak today does have vowel markers, but they were not part of original Hebrew. Original Hebrew reflected the ancient Commission Egyptian tradition that vowels were sacred, never to be written. So usually per is P-R. Well, we put the E in there. Like I said, kemet can be spelled many different ways. We don't have, the I-E-I-O-U can be put in different ways. So per, P-E-R, we use the E. Per means house. And there were 5 main houses. Now, the first one establishes a basic understanding of the tradition right to begin with. Right away, will differ with Egyptology and academic understanding. The word pharaoh, is a Greek word. It is based again on the term per-ah. Per, house, ah, high. It is the high house. Well, who did it refer to? It referred to the woman, a woman's house. Ancient Kemet Egypt was a matriarchy. From all its tradition, up until its first supposed ruler was a woman, to its last supposed ruler, who we label Cleopatra the Seventh. People just say Cleopatra. No, she was the 7th woman who took that title, Cleopatra. So the first ruler was a woman, last ruler was a woman. Basic descent all throughout the history of ancient Egypt was from mother to daughter. The civilization was matriarchy. So the number one thing we start out, again, our lectures with, there never was a male pharaoh. Period. End of discussion. Per-ah meant the high house. It was the woman's house. So who are these people we see depicted on the walls? Who are these people whose names are in the cartouches? They were the male head of the family selected by the woman who was the per-ah. Her choice of that person as her consort made him the male head of the family. He were the ones who the priests flattered and put on the walls, but there never was a male pharaoh. Period. That's number one. Number 2, key. The term is per-ba. Actually, the first one, next one, per-ka. Now, we talk about per house. Ka. Ka is that, again, the personality. Now, there have been many people who've written books about Ka and have gotten it wrong. The Ka is, again, would be basically considered like our double, our personality, that which stays with the body when we die, so that when the body would die, they would make offerings to the Ka. And what was the per-Ka? That was the tomb. The per-Ka became the place where you put the body. That was the tomb. So that's where they would make offerings in the temple, in the tomb, in the per-ka, to the ka, because they considered that the ka, the personality, like the ego in essence, stays with the body. But then there was another expression, ba. Ba, usually depicted as a bird with a human head, was what we would call today's soul. Well, I prefer the term spirit. There was that essence of us which is never born, never dies, which is pure consciousness, which is, exists forever. So that's the ba would be the house of the spirit. That would be your temple. That would be where you would go to engage in practices, taking psychoactive plants, breathing, using crystals, all the things we think of today, meditation in the so-called chanting, the so-called New Age community, which is a term that one of my teachers hated because he used to say that Nick Nocerino, who was the master of crystal skulls, used to say, how can you call the recovery of ancient wisdom new? He hated the term New Age. It's the Now Age, not the New Age. But anyway, all the things we think of today, reflexology, naturopathy, things that you're involved in, were all big things that would be instituted in the Purba, in the temple. Things to raise consciousness. Activities that would make us understand that we're more than the body. That was the temple. Now comes the key one. Last one, per netter. Netter. Netter is the key term. Usually written NTR. Again, we put in the E's and ETRs, how we usually express it. The modern author who did the most work in coming to the correct understanding was, again, R.A. Schwaller de Lubisch, this French Alsatian philosopher, mathematician, who wrote some incredible books, one called Sacred Science, one called The Temple of Man, where he had a good understanding of the ancient system. He was the one who first challenged the modern definition of netter. Netter defined by Champollion, the Frenchman who supposedly first translated hieroglyphics. He translated them wrong. That's the key to understanding why the Egyptologists do not understand what the glyphs mean. They're not ever to be read as a literal language like Greek was, but the Greeks didn't understand that, so they made it a literal language. In other words, A, B, C, D, E. The glyphs were never to be written as an alphabetical language or to be written that way, but that's how the Greeks imposed that understanding. They created the alphabet, and so that's how the language was written. So the netter was supposedly, by Champollion down to Budge, translated as deity. Usually there would be a symbol, and then there would be either a seated male or a seated female after it, so they considered that they were talking about gods and goddesses. This is why Egyptology believes that the ancient Cometians, Egyptians, were worshiping many, many gods and goddesses. This is why we talk about it today. We all do. We talk about the goddess Isis, the god Horus, the god Osiris, the goddess Hathor, and yet in the original understanding they were never conceived as deity. They were to be a principle of the divine, an aspect of the divine, never the whole itself. Never were they discussing God as we understand it today when they were talking about Osiris or Hathor or Horus. They were principles, aspects of the divine. And Hakim taught us that we are born innately with 360 of them in us, senses. He actually defined netter as meaning a sense, something that we have within us. So that if we're taught that we're only using 5 senses, it is, as Hakim would teach us, we are crippled today. Because we are taught by the ancient Cometians, we're innately born with 360 senses. 180 we label feminine, 180 we label masculine. Polarities, but it really is 180 principles in duality, and that became the whole idea of goddess and god. They were not goddess and god. They were divine principles. So Pernetter is the house of the divine principle. It also, the word netter, misunderstood by the Greeks, they associated it with the Greek word physis, which is where we get the word physics or physical. The next civilization, Romans, came along, and in their Latin language, they saw physis, what the Greeks were talking about, and they gave the word more closer to the ancient Cometian word, natura, nature. So netter is closely aligned to the English word nature. So we call the per netter the house of nature or the house of energy, and it is what the Greeks called pyramidos. The Greeks called that per netter the house of the fire in the middle, which is what pyramidos means. In its basic Greek understanding, it did not refer to a tomb or a place where a dead body was Pyramidos means fire in the middle. So even the ancient Greeks themselves thought that there was some type of machine or activity going on in there. But that's where the word pyramid comes from, per neter, which is the house of energy, house of nature. Here, I always pause during lecture and say, in its original intent, no one was to ever be buried or interred in a per neter. Period. End of discussion.
Okay. Then just take a little pause right here and let me interject a question before we move on to the next piece, because I know that's a big one. Okay, so there are, the pyramids at Giza, but then, if I'm correct, like the step pyramid, isn't it decorated on the inside?
No.
There's one of them that was not
there is,
in
but
Giza.
No, what you're talking about is so-called fifth. Now, okay, let's understand, because we do have to. You bring up an excellent point.
Well, and I'm trying to make it so that people can understand, because there are the pyramids in South America. They talk about pyramids in China, and so I'm just trying to make it so that we can separate out what we're going to be talking about as a pyramid, and then everything else.
Right. You are correct in that they were later used as symbolic tombs. Now, let's understand. We're talking about the original construction of pyramids. Now, I'm talking about the Giza pyramids. What Hakim presented to us was another understanding within the larger understanding of Kemet, being the whole civilization. There was another understanding of a series of sites from Dashur in the south to Abu Wash in the north, including the famous sites of Saqqara that you mentioned and Giza, which he called the land of Osiris, in the ancient term Bu-Wizir. Again, another misunderstanding. A lot of people don't understand that the term Osiris, the Greek word, a lot of people write Asar or Osar, which they think it means. Hakim was the only one who ever came up with the pronunciation Wizir for Osiris, where the word wisdom and wizard comes from. So, Bu-Wizir, the land of Osiris, was a series of sites, as I mentioned, 25 square miles from Dashur in the south to Abu Wash in the north. All were characterized by having stone masonry pyramids, stone masonry meaning out of granite, limestone, basalt, out of the hardest materials on our planet. All pyramids in a grid line, all acting as energy devices operating together. Those devices were all constructed well over 10,000 years ago. So the oral tradition tells us that what was Kemet, ancient Kemet, existing long before Egyptology or academia understands, over 10,000 years ago was an advanced civilization using advanced technology to create stone masonry pyramids to cut through the hardest stones we have on this planet like they were butter, like they were of wood, to bevel things in tolerances we find. Again, I refer to people to the work of Christopher Dunn, the Giza Power Plant, and his recent book came out last year, Lost Technologies in Ancient Egypt. Incredible books, incredible contributions to the human knowledge experience that talk about that these devices, statues and temples and pyramids in Egypt that we're looking at, these stone masonry pyramids over 10,000 years ago, had to have been constructed with the most advanced means of technology to cut granite to tolerances that Chris Dunn has found to 2/10,000ths of an inch. I say it again, tolerances in granite of 2/10,000ths of an inch, not called for today in manufacturing. The highest that's called for in manufacturing today in granite in 2011 is about 1/4 of an inch, 1/25th of an inch. There's no reason to have a tolerance higher.
1/4 of an inch?
1/4 of an inch.
You can almost drive a car through that.
Oh, no. A tolerance at 1/4 of an inch, 1/25th of an inch is pretty good. I mean, that's pretty strong, and you have to have diamond tools to do that.
Well, I mean, maybe in granite, but, if you're doing machining, you could drive a car through it.
Right,
anyway,
but not granite. Not granite. You're talking granite, which is 7.75 on the Mohs scale of 10. To cut granite, you have to have something that's as hard as the quartz. What makes granite so hard is not the feldspar, which is the substrate, but it's the fact that granite is a igneous rock containing quartz crystal within it. Why did the ancient Cometians choose this particular granite that comes from Aswan, 600 miles away from the Great Pyramid? So you think about transportation, you have to think about all the logistics involved in building a Great Pyramid, not only leveling the plateau, but cutting the stone, and then building the pyramid, and then transporting the stone, because granite is not available at Giza, 600 miles away from Aswan. But the granite at Aswan is called rose quartz crystal. It's 55% rose quartz granite. It has the highest crystalline content of any granite in the world. And they knew that. They chose the stone for that. So to cut granite, basically you need something hard as quartz or harder, i.e. diamond tools. To cut something of a tolerance of 2/10,000ths of an inch would hide the highest manufacturing tolerances today and the highest drill bits made out of the finest granite, finest diamond to do that. So they did that over 10,000 years ago.
Or something completely different.
Or something completely. And believe me, people have proposed all sorts of different theories. But Chris Dunn, being a very practical man, sees evidence of drills. We see drill marks, we see drill cuts, we see evidence of rotary drills, ultrasonic machining, something spinning at an incredibly fast feed rate. We can show you drill marks. This goes on and on. I have complete documentation. We have done this, of course, for so many years to show the evidence of the tools, of the evidence of the high-speed machining that was used. So, now, to follow up on your point, though, we're talking about the original pyramids. Pyramids have been continued to be built, even up until dynastic times. So they were built out of lesser materials. It's easy for me to take you to Egypt, show you what are the ancient pyramids with the massive megalithic constructions and use of the stonework, to the more modern pyramids, where they suddenly started using smaller blocks, where they even then went to sandstone, and eventually to mud brick, which just disappeared in the rainfall. And that is why we know that the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, you mentioned, is actually younger than the Great Pyramid, not older. Opposite to what Egyptology teaches. Egyptology says that the Step Pyramid was the first attempt to build a stone masonry pyramid in the 3rd dynasty, 2700 BCE, and then the later Giza pyramids were models of that. Nonsense! It is completely the opposite. The Step Pyramid is not a true pyramid. It is what we call a symbolic pirka. It was built during dynastic times as a symbolic tomb. Nobody was ever buried in there. But, we're talking about, in Egypt, they have discovered as many as 72 pyramids. Most of them were built during dynastic times and fits into what you were talking about. The dynastic people, now I'm talking about from 3000 BC to around, let's say, 33 BC is when Cleopatra falls. That's really the end of, around 125 AD, Egypt becomes, the Romans leave Egypt, so the Arabs come in and take it over. So we're talking about from about 3000 BC to about 33 BC, which is the dynastic period. They were building pyramids. No one was ever buried in them. They were symbolic tombs. They then conceived themselves, having lost the knowledge of their own ancestors, that the pyramids were glorified structures of their ancestors, and so that they wanted to identify with their ancestors, so they built symbolic pyramids. Inferior, we can show you the difference in construction, but no one was ever buried in them. So the classic answer is no one was ever buried in a pyramid in Egypt, period. But in later times, they did think the pyramids had something to do with their ancestors, so they built pyramids to be symbolic tombs, but the actual burial of the person was thousands of miles away.
Okay. The construction, all right, I have one more I have so many questions for you. The construction of the pyramid, and one of the things that I mentioned prior was the temple by the Sphinx that definitely had cyclopean architecture. Do you find similarities of that kind of architecture in South America or in other places around the world?
Yes, one of the key. Now, I'm going to be involved in a major project. I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to wait till the end to do sort of commercials, but I want to do it now because you're bringing that up. I'm going to be involved in a major documentary next year, 2-hour documentary. They're about to get funding for it. The group is called Ancient Tomorrow. Everybody who's listening, go to ancienttomorrow.com. Of course, one word, Ancient Tomorrow. It's a group of young investigators, Hollywood producers, and scientists who are interested in the fact that there may be evidence of ancient civilizations that could provide new energy sources for us today and the future. So in doing that, we're going to be going to sites all around the world. So yes, to answer your question, you've had Brian Foster on. You've interviewed him. He is a master of one of the sites of the world that I am so anxious to see, known as Pumapunku in Bolivia, which shows the same type of advanced technology in basalt and granite as we see all over Egypt. And yes, the answer to you is I see this type of technology all around the world, not just Egypt, Bolivia, and Peru, also in China, also in India, also perhaps even in ancient Europe. Not as old as we see in Egypt, but the same type of ability to work with the most difficult stones and the most difficult type of advanced engineering. So the idea is being, and this is what Hakim taught us, that prior to 10,000 years ago, we do not believe in an Atlantis. In other words, we do not believe there was one advanced civilization that fell and then fed all other civilizations around the world. I'm saying to you that there was Atlantis all around the world. Over 10,000 years ago, there were advanced civilizations all around our planet. They all are characterized by having stone masonry pyramids. We can discover that. We can document that. And that's one of my projects. So it was not just Egypt, and we see it clearly in Bolivia at the site of Pumapunku, also Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo. A lot of the sites which Brian Foster has brilliantly deduced are no way that they are Incan. They are thousands of years older than the Inca. In fact, he has uncovered an amazing unknown culture, unknown basically to academia, called the Paracas people with the elongated skulls. Not to go in detail about that. I know you talked with Brian about that. But this is a culture which I am fascinated in. I believe it may be contemporaneous with the ancient Commissions. They may have been cultural contacts, and the Paracas people may have built stone masonry pyramids too in Bolivia and Peru that we're going to uncover.
Well, actually, I'm kind of like poking around on Facebook, the place where you get all of your information, because he just put up a new website. But actually, if Brian has a ton of videos on YouTube that show Pumapunku, Sacsayhuaman, so you can say those names, and I just go, bleh, bleh, bleh.
Yes, I know. But what's great about this documentary, Ancient Tomorrow, will be featuring myself, Brian Foster, and Chris Dunn at these sites. And I can't think of two better people in the world that I'd rather be at these sites with.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. But you see the same kind of construction then?
Yes.
In the pyramids, or a similar kind of construction.
Similar, good point, because the real expert, the one who will make that determination, will be Christopher Dunn. There's nobody that in my opinion, who understands manufacturing in the modern world more than he has. He's been almost 50 years in the field of manufacturing, was recruited from Manchester, England as an 18-year-old teenager, journeyman apprentice machinist, to come to the U.S. to work in the American aerospace industry. He's worked in high-end industrial lasers. He's worked in the most sophisticated, most advanced machining techniques there are in the world today. There is no one who's more qualified to determine what kind of technology was used by the ancients than he. Now, he does say, and this is what hopefully our special will deal in more detail, that he does see subtle differences between what at Pumapunku in Bolivia and, say, at Giza in Egypt. But the same advanced knowledge was there, but maybe a little bit different techniques that, he will be more sophisticated. He will be able to more break that down. But clearly he will say that it's obvious that all these sites that we're looking at show an advanced technology that is not recognized by archaeology and academia today.
Has anyone ever looked at the weathering on some of the sculptures in Egypt? I mean, I know most of the surface plates from the pyramids are gone, so it's kind of hard to make a determination that way. To look at the erosion patterns, all right, we're not talking about the Sphinx complex because we've already been there. Let's not talk there. Well, yes, I know, but that is just so obvious. I'm talking about, in a more subtle way. I mean, because one of the things, I was looking at a picture of Stonehenge the other day, and I go, what if these were done neat and clean like you see in other places, but maybe they're just so old that they're just weathered to that funky stone pattern.
Yes, no, you're correct. And again, the Sphinx is the greatest example of water-based erosion. But this is what, as I say, one major area, Hakim was such a great teacher that he knew exactly what each person needed and where they needed to go. What he wanted me to concentrate in my research with him was the interplay of sound and water, and how the ancients' knowledge of sound and water is something that we're just approaching today. So we see evidence of water erosion in a lot of areas where there was not supposed to be water because this is a desert. So this would indicate, again, we know from the work of Dr. Robert Schoch, the geologist, and other paleoclimatologists, there I got it out, that the desert, the Sahara Desert, where there's desert conditions in Egypt today, is less than 10,000 years, probably less than 8,000 years. So, and again, we'll talk about this when we talk about my second book the next time I come on, because I talk about a great cataclysm that I agree, I am definitely convinced happened around 11,500 years ago, which changed the climate patterns all around the planet. And that's when the desert conditions came in. The Sahara Desert is less than 10,000 years. So if we can see severe water erosion on certain parts, certain structures, that means that it was before this time period has to be older than 8,000 years. This is how Robert Schoch has redated the Sphinx. Looking at the water erosion on the Sphinx side, the body of the Sphinx, there's been no significant rainfall in Egypt for 5,000 to 8,000 years. The water erosion on the Sphinx shows she has to be older than 8,000 years, and she's older than 10,000 years. Hakim said 54,000 years. So we look at water erosion. Yes, we do look at erosion patterns. What we would see in modern times is wind and sand erosion, which the modern desert conditions and the modern, what comes out of Egypt every spring out of the south is known as the Khamasin. It's a tremendous, it's called the Sirocco winds that usually go across the deserts. In California, they're called the Santa Ana winds. We have them here in Colorado, they're called the Chinook winds. That comes from the opposite direction wind is supposed to go, usually in the summertime, and brings, heat, brings a lot of heat. So the Khamasin in Egypt comes out of the south, and it's like why the Bedouins have to wear, clothes that only their eyes are showing. I mean, the wind can tear this flesh right off your skin. So this is why most of the monuments we see exposed in Egypt today, of course, show wind and sand erosion the last 5,000 to 8,000 years. But if we can see things that are underground or that are not directly exposed to the environment, and it shows water erosion, it shows something that's older.
Okay.
But again, the Sphinx is the classic example. The Sphinx has been totally redated because of the water-based erosion, because of the brilliant work of Robert Schoch and John Anthony West, and being an academic.
But it has that, but that enclosure is all sandstone and limestone, so that just erodes so much faster that to me, even though I don't disagree. It's not going to erode. Like when I look at the pictures that come out of Pumapunku, they look like they've been rained on a lot. They
yes.
look like there has definitely been a history of erosion on those stones and those
Correct.
stone
And
surfaces.
I would date it as being pre-flood or pre-cataclysm, meaning pre-11,500 years. So in other words, there's been a severe change in erosion patterns, in climate patterns, after this great cataclysmic event. So they changed. So water erosion patterns that you would see that distinct, that eroded from water in a place like Pumapunku, which is high in Altiplano, which Brian and I have discussed that we think before 11,500 years ago, there weren't any Andes, there weren't any Rockies, there weren't any Himalayas before 10,000. These mountain ranges are all that young, so that Pumapunku was probably closer to the sea level when that site was built, and that's why you see so much water-based erosion there. Now it's up in the high Altiplano, high in the mountains, like Tiahuanaco, 12,000 feet up. It wasn't originally. That's why it shows water-based erosion.
All right, making a note.
But Pumapunku is a site that I have been longing for years. Brian has just been there 3 times in the last couple of weeks. I mean, every time he goes there, there's more things to find. I just can't wait to set my foot at Pumapunku.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so without going into this catastrophe, this is something that's been bothering me, so I'm going to ask you, and I'd like to hear if you have an opinion, and if you don't, it might be something for you to think about. Okay, so when you look at calendar systems, the majority of calendar systems that are ancient calendar systems say there are 360 days plus 5. Okay? But if these people are so smart and can navigate these cycles and know about the precession of the equinox and know when eclipses are going to happen and they know all of this stuff, why would they and don't give me the 360 degrees is a circle thing. Why would they have a calendar that's 360 plus 5? Do you think there might be a parallel to something that happened on the planet that might have changed the orbital pattern?
First of all, the ancient Cometians used 4 calendars. The Mayans used 3. So you have to decide what calendar you're talking about. The ancient Egyptians had a Solstice calendar, a calendar based on the movement of Sirius that was exactly 365.25 days per year. More exact than our solar calendar, which we have to have a leap year every 4 years to catch up. So they had a more accurate calendar than we do, based on the movement of Sirius, not on our sun. But the idea of a 360-day calendar was because there were 360 netters, as I expressed, 180 feminine, 180 masculine. The 5 days were known as the intercalary days, where all netters were observed, and they would just have no work. In other words, the ancient Cometians would take a 5-day vacation every year and just party for 5 days. So that was the normal social calendar, a 360-day calendar based on the fact that they're 360 netters. But they also had a 365.25-day calendar based on the movement of Sirius. And as I said, they had 2 other calendars. So, but the ancient people did not have calendars. That's the point. There is no evidence of a calendar existing before this cataclysmic event, 11,500 years ago. We have notations that showed that so-called people 14, 15, 20,000 years ago marked movements of the moon on bone. They showed phases of the moon, but that might have been a lunar calendar or it might not. But there's no evidence of a formal calendar existing before 4000 BCE. And there's no evidence of humans practicing astrology or astronomy before 8000 BCE.
That far back?
So all of these things are modern reflections of this cataclysm. The idea that something happened that was not predicted. Only the wisest of the wise knew it was coming, that it was going to be the end of the cycle. But most people were caught unawares. Barbara Hand Clow has written an excellent book on the subject called Catastrophobia.
Actually, we have her coming on next month.
And you can mention Hakim to her because she always talks about it. She was the first one to write about Hakim as being her teacher. And Hakim and I agreed that our opinion, consider that Barbara's most important book, Catastrophobia. And yet she will tell you it's her least seller. But she basically was basing her work on a book that she published when she was the editor and owner of Barron Company. She has since sold it to Inner Traditions, was why I would have originally been with Barron Company, but she sold. She was going to publish me. But she based her work, Catastrophobia, on a book called Cataclysm, 9500 BC, by 2 British scientists, Allen and Dallaire, who document scientific evidence of this cataclysmic change. Barbara said that the people that survived that cataclysm came with a psychological trauma that caused them to become obsessed with observing. Something happened from the sky. It's a Greek myth, the Greek of Photon. You get Phaeton. She can talk about Phaeton in greater detail. But the Greek myth of an invader came from the sky and destroyed and damaged the earth. Well, they think it's a comet with a flyby or a meteorite. Something hit the earth and caused this massive change in our earth, actually caused a tilt on the axis. And everybody that survived it had this trauma that they did not know this invader was coming, and invented then the systems of astrology, astronomy, and calendars to be able to predict if the invader was going to come back. Before then, the ancient Cometians were not concerned at all about calendars, about dates, or about time, which is a hard thing for people to understand.
They were just hanging out.
That's it.
In their little huts. Rolling rocks on sticks.
Well, the Great Pyramid, all these pyramids were producing massive amounts of free energy that ran the civilization. That's maybe what we should discuss exactly what the pyramids did before.
Well, yeah, and we've had kind of this discussion before, and it, on one level it makes sense. On a different level, it's like, well, energy, and I'm going to throw this out, and you don't have to answer that first, but energy for what? They didn't have blenders. They weren't making frappuccinos. So, with that said,
that's the classic 101 question. Every time I've been on with George Norrie on Coast to Coast, and I've been on with him for 10 years, that's the question that comes up. What did they use energy for? Well, what do we use energy for? Does any biological system, any system needs an input of energy to maintain? So, if they had a civilization, they needed energy. Well, maybe they didn't have televisions or blenders or cars, but they did have lights. They did have electricity without wires. They did have a need of energy. They had to have machines. They did have a civilization to run. They needed energy to power their machines. So any civilization needs to have an input of energy to maintain itself. And unfortunately, when it's a civilization like ours, which deals with artificial energy inputs that it has to maintain from hostile countries, you have the political problems you do. But if you can produce free energy yourself, imagine what political problems you would have. None.
Okay, so was Egypt the only place that was producing power, or were there other power stations scattered around the world?
That is a great question, and I'm working on the hypothesis. It's not even a theory, but the hypothesis is that there was a worldwide grid, and that civilizations were in contact all around the world sharing free energy.
Okay. I'm like, well, do we want to go into the whole how it works? I'm like,
sure.
I kind of feel like, just touch on it because I really want to get Christopher Dunn back on and just really
yes.
knock it out with him. So just kind of.
So basically we're saying that the Great Pyramid was a machine producing all incredible amounts of varied types of free energy. What types of energy? Well, what we have able to document so far, electricity, microwave energy, hydrogen gas was produced, and even quantum waves. Now, here's where we get nice into where we have future projects. In the course of my work, I got involved with a Ukrainian physicist. His name is Dr. Vladimir Krasnolahovitz. We call him Dr. K. You can see why. He is one of the brilliant quantum theoretical physicists in the world. He was actually a part of the former Soviet Union when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. He helped design the Mir space station. He has actually come up with a unified field theory, something that Einstein was searching for before he died, to link all systems of ideas together. He called it interton theory. Basically, just to break it down simply, it's the fact that subatomic particles constantly colliding produce energy waves. These waves are called intertons. So in other words, there's no such thing as a vacuum of space. Energy, consciousness is everywhere. Again, just to get to our point, Dr. K believes that the people who designed and built the Great Pyramid had a knowledge of quantum physics that we're just approaching today. So he has postulated that the Great Pyramid pulses quantum waves. Not only has he just postulated that, but he has a device to measure it. It's called a TESI device, based on one of the Russian scientists who invented a small, portable, battery-operated device, perfect for us to bring in the Great Pyramid and test this. He claims with this device you can develop a background, which is a standard, which means we're naturally being bombarded, like cosmic waves, like X-rays. We're being bombarded by these interton waves constantly. That's a natural background. So you form a background, and then if you can establish that the Great Pyramid is pulsing these waves, this is not normal. This is not natural. This is something that could be man or induced waves. So therefore he would be contending that the people who built the Great Pyramid built it to pulse these quantum waves, and what he maintains is these quantum waves maintain the optimum degree of health, kept our immune systems totally operational, kept our consciousness at the high peak, and enabled people to live hundreds of years. We believe this is the basis of the patriarchs of the Old Testament. Methuselah, 900 years. And then isn't it interesting that Enoch in the Old Testament is traditionally considered to be the patron of the Great Pyramid. How long did Enoch live? Do you know?
He was taken off the earth when
how
he was
long
365. You don't know.
365 years. 365 years is what the Bible says.
You don't know. That's when they came and got him.
Yeah, right. But it happens to be the number of years in a day. You think it's by accident? The number of days in a year.
It's that number thing. You have to really kind of think about it.
But again, just to bring it back, the Russians have done experiments because basing on this, there is a whole, again, if people go to this website you talked about, GizaPyramid.com, they will see Russian research. Russians over the years built pyramids, not using the geometry of the Great Pyramid, just built pyramids, but they did all sorts of tests to show that immune systems, viruses were killed, et cetera, that the pyramid shape itself, the geometry of the pyramid shape, does something to the human psyche, to the human system. The ancients knew that. That's why they incorporated the sacred geometry in it. But actual functioning of the Great Pyramid enabled people to be at the optimum state of health, both emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And so that is one of the major functions. But to be honest with you, in the research that we've done, Chris Dunn has been investigating the Great Pyramid since the 70s. So have I. We can not even document to you all the different types of energy the Great Pyramid produced. Example, unknown. The Great Pyramid sides are not flat. It's actually 8-sided. The Great Pyramid is actually not 4-sided, it is 8-sided. But the sides are all indented. What the Great Pyramid is a 4-sided micro-wish microwave dish antenna. Microwaves accumulate on the outside of the Great Pyramid. It's also shown that the Great Pyramid produces radio waves and may receive radio waves. It may have been a great transmitting station, receiving station. From who? From anywhere. Anywhere on the planet? Maybe from extraterrestrials. Maybe from interdimensionals. If you want to go there, people go there. But the fact of the matter is the Great Pyramid produced so many different types of energy, we do not have a lifetime to document all of them. But it was a massive station of free energy. Free energy. Non-polluting.
And it doubled as a tomb.
Not environmentally safe. Environmentally safe, non-polluting. And as long as water, which is the key to what Hakim taught me, water was the source of the energy. As long as there was a continual supply of water, the machine could go on forever. It did last for thousands of years. How many machines have we built today that will last thousands of years? But it ceased its function as a machine when this cataclysm hit.
Okay, hold that thought about the water. I want to interject one quick question, and then we're going to come back to that because I want to talk about the tunnels as well.
Right.
Bosnia, Sam Osmgach,
yes,
that's how you say it,
yes.
has been doing a lot of testing.
You're probably as close as pronouncing it as Asmajanic, I think, something like that, yeah.
It's a phonics thing, yeah,
Well,
anyway,
name.
They've been doing a lot of measuring at that pyramid. I'm going to say it, pyramid. Have you been paying attention to what's been going on there, and do you see any parallels? Do you think it's pyramid? Maybe we should start there.
Well, it's very interesting. Like I said, it was because of Dr. K, Vladimir Krasnodar, that Land of Osiris was originally translated into Russian. He became such a great supporter of my and Chris Dunn's work that he tried hard to get us published, and he got a Ukrainian publisher to publish Land of Osiris in Russian. Well, the Russian edition was so popular that the Croatians, because the Bosnian pyramids were being talked about, it was produced in Croatia. So because my book is produced in Croatian, of course I have a big following there. So I know a lot about the researchers of the Bosnian pyramids. I have not been there, so that is my final word. I cannot make a definitive statement on anything unless I see it and witness it for myself. But Chris Dunn has. Chris Dunn is not sure about the construction of the pyramid, but he said the tunnels underneath where he went into are definitely man-made. So he was there to say that. Others have been there and say the pyramids are definitely man-made, that they are real pyramids. I have no problem with there being pyramids in ancient Europe, because ancient Europe, again, what we're taught, Kemet was not just Africa. What was ancient Kemet was Africa, Asia, and Europe. So that pyramids in Europe I have no problem with. But again, I have not been there, not seen it for myself. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Sam has made some outlandish claims, which I think have discredited, in my opinion, his veracity. He's already said that the Bosnian pyramids are older than the Giza pyramids. Well, how does he know how old the Giza pyramids are? You can't date pyramids. So how does he know? He's going by the conventional dating? So he's saying the Bosnian pyramid is older than 4,500 years? Well, I'm saying the Great Pyramid is 20,000 years old. So how can he say older than that?
Oh, I don't think he's arguing that point. I think he's arguing the 4,500-year-old date. Right.
But he's also going by some radiocarbon dating for some organic material that was found in the pyramid that is a bad technique. It is not accurate. The organic material could have obviously been put in much, much later. The same thing has happened in the Great Pyramid. They did some dating in the Great Pyramid of some organic material that was found, and they came up with a date that was 800 to 2,000 years before the time of Khufu. And this was Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass. They did that in the 80s and 90s, and they wouldn't accept the dates because it wasn't the date that they wanted. But it's argued that the material that they studied and tested wasn't accurate anyway. You can't date stone. You can't date when the pyramid was actually constructed, period. So to make a statement, this pyramid is older than that pyramid, is nonsense. So I just say that in passing.
Well, no, I think he was just saying that to kind of put a burn in the conventional wisdom,
He does. Most definitely. You're right.
With the date that we all agree is crap.
Right.
Okay.
But
one of the
again,
things
I trust Chris Dunn's observations. He has been to Bosnia. He has looked at the pyramids. He thinks the tunnels, what he saw in the tunnels, so we can talk about tunnels, he thinks they're man-made. So that would lend me to believe the pyramid is man-made too.
Well, and that was my next question is, that's something that the two of them definitely have in common, and, kind of an add-on question that hopefully you can add to other pyramids that are around the world. Do they have tunnels as well?
I think so, and that's the key. One of the keys, again, is Hakim wanted me to concentrate on the interplay of sound and water. How was the Great Pyramid built? We say by sound, by creating a sound field created anti-gravity. In other words, nobody ever hauled these blocks, nobody ever lifted these blocks. They created anti-gravity machines. We have them in the Cairo Museum. I show all my groups. It's in the land of Osiris. Schist plates that vibrated at an ultrasonic frequency created a sound vacuum. This has been demonstrated in modern time. Sound can cause pebbles to rise. So the principle has been demonstrated. So that's how it was built. Now, why do you think there were tunnels? Well, Hakim then would say the source of the energy of the pyramids was just plain old water. H2O. Well, we know for a fact, again, based on the work of Chris Dunn, people read Giza Power Plant, everything about the Great Pyramid is oriented to the frequency of hydrogen. The king's chamber, where supposedly there was a king built, or a king buried, a stone box, no sarcophagus, no evidence of burial ever. But everything in that chamber resonates to the frequency of hydrogen. So hydrogen is key. Chris Dunn first proposed in the Giza Power Plant, 1998, that the Great Pyramid produced hydrogen gas. Hakim confirmed that, but he just said that the source was water. So they would catalytically convert water into hydrogen and oxygen. The Great Pyramid, the sound, the acoustics of the Great Pyramid would raise that frequency of hydrogen to a high degree so that it actually could be used as a fuel source. Then comes the question which you may be formulating in your mind, how did they do? What was the delivery system? That is where we're not there yet. We don't know exactly how to deliver. Chris Dunn proposes some things in the Giza Power Plant, but we don't know how did they deliver the energy. How was it actually used? And again, the oral tradition doesn't tell us that. It just says that water was the source of the energy and produced all that energy. But we do know everything about the Great Pyramid is tuned to the frequency of hydrogen. And why hydrogen? Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. The Great Pyramid itself, if it was a radio frequency, it has been estimated. It has been not estimated. It has been said that if we wanted to communicate with extraterrestrials, if we really did want to have radio conversations with beings on other planets, what frequency would we use? 438 to 440 hertz, the frequency of hydrogen, because it's the most abundant element in the universe. So therefore, it is making a universal signal by producing a frequency of hydrogen. There could be a radio signal, but the hydrogen gas was used for energy, was used for fuel. So
I will bet that UFO people don't.
No, let me continue. Then the idea comes how will we get the water to the Great Pyramid? Well, what we observe is before they constructed anything on the surface. Now we're saying Great Pyramid 20,000 years ago. I'm saying Sphinx 54,000 years ago. Before they constructed anything on the surface, they did this incredible hydraulic engineering project of drilling tunnels straight through limestone bedrock to connect with the underground Nile River, which is out today in the western desert of Egypt, to bring that underground river to the current Nile Valley to have a source of water. So this is why under the Giza Plateau, it is literally honeycombed with tunnels, man-made, artificially drilled tunnels that crisscross each other on different layers like our arterial system in our body, veins and arteries, crossing each other at different levels, deep underneath to the surface level, all bringing water to the site, water to the pyramids for energy. Yes, every site in Egypt that we noticed had underground running water, particularly pyramids. Saqqara, absolutely, I can show you where the water is. And I believe will be part of my investigations for Ancient Tomorrow at the Peruvian sites, at Ollantaytambo, at Saxofarman, and particularly at Pumapunku. I'm going to be looking for sources of underground water. Yes, Rita, I believe that this is universal, will be all around the world, that ancient people had a knowledge of water, again, that we're only approaching today. I point to three scientists in the modern world, Victor Schauberger, Johann Grander, and the great Masaru Emoto today, who are the only scientists who've done any real work in understanding the true nature of water that the ancients do. And the ancient Egyptians considered someone who knew the secrets of water to be the wisest of the wise. So water was a secret to these people. Victor Schauberger, a modern Austrian scientist, identified 33 different types of water. Are we taught that in school? Are we taught that in university, that there are 33 types of water? No, we're taught it's H2O. We're not taught that there's different types of water, but there are. So we're just beginning to understand what the ancients knew about the interplay of sound and water, and that's what the Great Pyramid is about. It is, as we describe it, an acoustical machine. We also say a spiritual acoustical machine, because people don't understand. So many people concentrate on the nuts and bolts. They want to know how it was built, other structures, what did it function, how did it function. But they don't understand that there was no separation between spirituality and physicality to these people. No separation of what we would call religion and science. It was all the same, and all the same understanding. So they would not conceive of anything that did not have spirit, that did not have consciousness. They considered every construction they made, temple, pyramid, whatever, to be a living organism, not to be inorganic stone, but to have consciousness. Everything had consciousness, and everything fed consciousness to each other. So everything they saw was a continual cycle of events, cycles and cycles and cycles. And they did not believe in death. There was no word in the ancient Comitian language for death.
But, I mean, traditions like that still exist, you know, in Hinduism and other spiritual traditions, that everything has consciousness and we don't die and blah, blah, blah. You know, sometimes Hakim would be talking to me, and I would think I would hear the Buddha talking, or I would hear Lao Tzu talking. His teachings were very Taoist, very Taoist. In fact, he was given a title. He never liked labels. He said, we limit things when we're putting labels on them. But there were certain things that he accepted. Zahi Hawass and the Egyptology, they gave him a term that they considered derogatory. They called Hakim the father of meditation, and they considered that a derogatory term. Why? Because Hakim would bring his groups to sites and not just teach you. He was the greatest teacher of using both sides of the brain that I've ever experienced in my life. He would give you the left brain knowledge, what the glyphs mean, what the structure means, but then he'd say, come sit and meditate. Feel the energy of the site. Experience it directly. He would give you the direct experience, where all traditions have always told us, from every teacher to time immemorial, it's only our direct experience that give us our knowing. Not books, not teachers, not what somebody else tells you is their experience. It is only our direct experience that we achieve true knowing. And that's what we do. That's what I do. I'm leading a tour at the end of February. I'll talk about it before we're done. But that I teach the same way he taught me to teach, from both sides of the brain. You have to have the direct experience. And that's what the Comitians did with these structures, with these temples, with these pyramids, to have the direct experience of knowledge. And so they didn't have to write books. You know, and I think that's important. I have to think, it was in October, so I guess it was this fall. I was in New Mexico, and so we stopped at Petroglyph State Park, and we're walking all the trails, and I was running all around, taking 500 pictures, because that's what I do. And at one point, way in the back of this, you know, it's kind of like a horseshoe, and way, all the way at the back of the horseshoe, up at the top of this hill, were these rocks with a ton of petroglyphs all over them. So being, you know, the way I am, of course I had to climb up to the top of this thing, you know, but there was a woman sitting up there, which was kind of weird because, you know, but she was just kind of sitting there, and I felt bad because I felt like I was intruding on her meditation space. You know, so I went up there and I kind of hung out for a little bit, but I was just kind of led to go touch the stone where all the petroglyphs were. And I put my hand on, and I was like, whoa. There was so much power. Then I had to thank it for sharing that with me.
That's
and
very nice.
And then I looked down and said, oh, yeah, now I got to go climb down this mountain.
Yes. I mean, that experience happens every day in Egypt. I mean, sure. Nothing, I mean, I've been 15 times, but, you know, nothing will ever replace the first experience of touching the Great Pyramid and seeing the Sphinx for the first time. And I mean, great emotion. I had great emotional responses. And I've had so many people over the years who, you know, have been waiting their whole life to go to Egypt, wanting that experience, and just breaking down and hysterical sobbing and crying, you know, past lives this, past life that, and just, I mean, because the sites, you know, people don't understand, the energy's still there. That's the secret of Hakim's teaching. Though the civilization supposedly is dead and the pyramids are not machines anymore, each site is dedicated to a different energy. That's what the netter is. In other words, a site that's a temple of Osiris, a temple of Horus, that's the energy is represented. The energy's still there. and we would go to the area where Hakim was a master of knowing where the center of the energies were, what we call the Holy of Holies, where the main center, where the first point of a temple would be built, and then everything would be built around it. The sacred site, the sacred area where the energy of the dead is concentrated. And you don't have to have the intellectual understanding at all. People who are, more right brain than left brain, artists in particular, people in the arts, they come and they just experience, and the energy's still there, just like you said, touching your petroglyphs. And it never gets old for me. I tell that to people every day. The first day I bring my groups there, it never gets old. The energy's still there. I discover something new every time I go. I have an energetic experience, brand new, every time I go. It's there. That's why we go to what is a sacred site? What is a power place? I say they're characterized by three things physically. Wherever you have an ancient power place, sacred site in the world, it is characterized by underground running water, a natural source of crystal, and what is known as igneous rock, volcanic stone, granite, basalt, diorite, alabaster, which in itself is a source of crystal. So it's crystal and water create those electromagnetic fields, create the fields that we can physically measure. This is not just metaphysics. We can physically measure the energy at these sites and these fields, and that's what we're reacting to. Everybody can feel that. You don't have to be any kind of a sensitive, have been into metaphysics, studied mysticism, blah, 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 blah. I have had so many people, husbands whose wives dragged them to Egypt. They weren't into any of it. They could care less. Their wives was just dragging them along. I'm just here as a tourist. Boom, go inside the Great Pyramid. Like, whoa, this guy's crying. Why are you crying? I don't know why I'm crying. I'm just experiencing something. Or take them to another site. Like, why you have to sit down? Why are you sweating so much? Why are you having emotional response? I don't know. I'm having it. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to be into it at all. It's there. It's palpable.
All right, Stephen, I'm stopping you. I'm going to say 2 minutes because the music comes up in 2 minutes. So
okay,
there was something you wanted to announce real quick. Okay,
yes, let me pitch the tour. If people want to come, I'm going on tour. We had to postpone because of the revolution, but it is safe in Egypt. I say it to everybody that's listening. We are safer anywhere in Egypt than you would be in New York City. So no problem in going. No tourists are bothered. There's been no problem. February 25th to March 9th, the website is bodymindspiritjourneys.com. One word, bodymindspiritjourneys.com. I always tell people, don't just believe what I say, don't believe what I've written, come experience it for yourself. That's what it's all about. And also, again, ancienttomorrow.com for next year. It's going to be a great documentary.
Okay, so I'm assuming you're going to go to Giza. What other places are you going to visit while you're in Egypt?
We go from the Giza, Saqqara, Dashur. She'll go into another pyramid, so we actually go inside two different pyramids, the Red Pyramid and the Great Pyramid. We go down south to Luxor, to the Temple of Luxor, to the Temple of Dendera, for Hathor, to the Temple of Abydos, to the Temple of Isis in Philae, to the unfinished obelisk, to the granite quarry where the granite comes from. And then we wind up. The last thing is a private session inside the Great Pyramid. We get about an hour and a half, 2 hours to ourselves. No other groups come in. We do a sacred initiation. And I lead this tour with Hakim's eldest daughter, Sherazad Awyan, who is the lineage bearer, the wisdom keeper. She inherited her father's wisdom. She's an incredible knowledge healer. She heals in the ancient Egyptian techniques. We teach the healing on site. So cool. We not only teach, we lead initiations in every site, every temple we go to.
That sounds awesome. I mean, not just where we're going, but the whole ensemble. And you're very knowledgeable. I've seen people go on these tours, and it's like, well, you don't even know anything, so why would I want to go with you?
That's true, unfortunately. But yeah, we present all sides, though. We give people the standard Egyptology, let them experience that, and then we present the indigenous tradition, and let them experience the sites, the energies, and themselves. And believe me, I've had so many people come back and say it changed their lives,
Yeah. All right, Stephen, the music's going to come up here in a second, so I am going to thank you, and I actually got through about 4 questions on my paper, so I think I'm just going to tuck this in the book for when I have you back on, and Great. I'll just kind of keep them, and we can just pick this up later on, okay?
I would look forward to that.
Okay. Thank you much, and I will talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much. You have a good day.
All right. Bye. That's Stephen Mueller. His webpage is GizaPyramid.com. And, Stephen, if you're listening to me, send me an email with a link to that travel thing, and I will post it on the site because I don't remember it already. Anyway, next week, let's see, next week we're going to do a Christmas special. We're going to be talking about the Gospels, fact, fiction,